looking how we can deal with real criminals and how we can have a proper security when we have events with so many people there. So did you have confidential human sources? I think you never answered that question on January 6th in the Capitol. Did you have some?
I'm sorry, what's the
confidential human sources. Did you have them on January 6th in the Capitol?
Well, again, I'm never going to be getting into when and where we have or have not used confidential human sources. But
are you willing to stand the record that you had no confidential human sources that went into Capitol on January 6th?
As I've said consistently, I'm not going to get into where we have or have not used confidential human sources. I can tell you that if you are asking if the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources or agents, the answer is no.
No, I didn't ask you that. I asked, so did you investigate any confidential human sources? Did you do any investigation and looking at that? So you're not answering if you had any or not. So if you had potential, did you do anything you needed to make sure to investigate that none of your sources did anything wrong? If they did wrong, they were prosecuted the same way, like you're trying to prosecute a lot of people that really, even in Supreme Court rule recently, that some unconstitutional charges.
Let me just add that there have now been, I think, 180 individuals who've gone to trial, in addition to the 850 who've pled guilty.
Right, but I think the problem is you put these charges, a lot of people would put guilty. But let me say just quickly, because I only have 10 seconds, really. So I hope you will take seriously what you're doing. You know, related to the border security is also a crisis. You know, your vice president was a lead-in on that. She initiated meetings with you to lead, like weekly or monthly meeting where she actually get briefings from you as a lead-in border czar that had that function. Have you had that? Has she initiated any meetings on a regular basis with you?
Again, generally, his time has expired. The gentleman can respond.
Right. On this issue of confidential human sources, number one, I will say there is a DOJ OIG review that's underway that I think addresses some of these kinds of topics, I believe, but I won't speak for the Inspector General. Second, as to this suggestion, which I've heard all too many times, that somehow January 6th was orchestrated by FBI agents or sources, I will note that in addition to my prior comments, that there have now been 850-ish individuals who've pled guilty, another 180 who've gone to trial. They've all had access to defense counsel, discovery, all the things the Constitution and the rules provide them. It's been in front of something like 15 different judges, I think dozens of juries, and not one has given credence to this notion. And in fact, I don't think any of them have even really seriously tried to raise it. So it's not just my word for it. Look what's happening in the cases. Thank you.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Wray, for being here, for your testimony today, for the work that you do each and every day, and that your frontline agents across the country do each and every day to protect Americans, to keep our country safe. Also grateful for the work that you're doing in investigating the horrific events of July 13th and the attempted assassination of former President Trump, which everyone must and has condemned. I would first just ask, do you believe that the FBI has the adequate resources to ultimately ensure that your agency gets to the bottom of it and fully investigates this terrible crime?
Well, we are devoting massive amounts of resources to this specific investigation. We have easily several hundred FBI agents, analysts, and professional staff working on it. It involves over half of the FBI's 56 field offices, almost every headquarters division. We even have some of our overseas offices working on it. You might say, well, why is that? Well, because some of the companies that involve accounts or purchases or communications or what have you that the shooter used are foreign companies, so we have to get evidence from overseas from those companies. I've talked about our lab a little bit earlier today. We've got our Office of Technology Division working on the digital devices We have our Behavioral Analysis Unit, our BAU, working on helping us build out a profile of the shooter. I could go on and on and on. So it's all hands on deck on this case as I think is appropriate. Now, when you ask about our resources, I've been public about the fact that the fiscal year 24 budget put us $500 million below where we needed to be to sustain current operations. And on FY25, the current House mark would put us significantly further back behind that and would result in significant risks across every program and our support to state and local law enforcement. We arrested something like 50 violent criminals per day, every day, last year. The current mark would mean more violent criminals on the street, more neighborhoods at risk. We have about a 1,300% increase in our investigations related to China and its targeting of us. And I can assure you, China's not cutting its budget. This would mean more threats from China. We have something like 300 to 400 investigations just into cartel leadership. And about hardly a week goes by when some FBI field office isn't seizing enough fentanyl to wipe out an entire state. Those cuts means more fentanyl on the street, more people dying. So the people who suffer the most are state and local law enforcement and the American people we're sworn to protect. And so we're sort of working with Congress, but we really need to be smart about what we're doing, and I think that would be a step in the wrong direction given the threat environment that we face.
And I couldn't agree with you more, Director Wray, and of course we've talked about this during previous hearings in which you've testified, and to be clear, that I think the budget that House Republicans have proposed, which is about a $325 million cut to the FBI, would do precisely what you've described and have deleterious impacts for public safety across our country, and House Democrats are certainly working to prevent those cuts from taking place. You've talked at great length about the events of July 13. There's justifiably a lot of public interest in the investigation, which we understand is ongoing. Wonder if there's anything that you'd like to disclose or provide to the committee or to the public that perhaps has not yet been gleaned during the course of this hearing, and just give you an opportunity, because there's a lot of folks related to the investigation. Yeah.
One thing I can give an update on, which is pretty fresh here. We had some conversations with some of the members about the access to the roof and the ladder and so forth. And our evidence response teams and their forensic collection, we've now believed that the subject climbed onto the roof using some mechanical equipment on the ground and vertical piping on the side of the AGR building. In other words, we do not believe he used a ladder to get up there.
One question, if the chairman might indulge me with just a few extra seconds. There's an article recently regarding several former Trump administration national security officials who had received a duty to warn briefing from the FBI regarding the potential threat from Iran. And I think there is this article made clear deep concern that these individuals have, justifiably so, about the threat level, particularly given the events of the last several months, and the need for there to be an increased security posture and security personnel for former officials who may very well
stand at risk. And our wall is not made up only of our own soldiers, our brave heroes, but also the friendship and alliance with the great United States of America. That is very much expressed here today, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity. And the people of Israel, thank you for giving us this opportunity to express our common alliance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Much, which is that in my view, the Iranian government has been extremely aggressive and brazen. We have seen in the last few years an attempt, I'm speaking just from public information now, an attempt to assassinate a former U.S. National Security Advisor on U.S. soil. We have seen an attempt first to kidnap and then to try to murder an American dissident/journalist who was a critic of the Iranian regime, right smack in the middle of New York City. We have seen a cyber attack against a children's hospital in New England that ties back to Iran. We have seen, as I've testified before, as Director Ratcliffe and I announced, an effort by the Iranians to target the 2020 presidential election. And that's all before you even get to the fact that the Iranian government is the leading state sponsor of terrorism. So if that's not enough to convince people that Iran is a threat, I don't know what is.
But Director, was there a distinction between what the gentleman from Colorado raised and what you just said, this general concern in these specific incidents you talk about, and a direct specific threat on President Trump that's distinct from what you've been describing as this general concern with Iran?
Well, again, I can't get into specific pieces of class.
And if so, when? If it was
Yeah.
a distinct threat on President Trump, when did that take place?
Yeah, all I can tell you, certainly in this kind of setting, is targeting of U.S. officials for the Soleimani strike is something that is a reality that the Iranian government has at times called for very publicly. And whenever there is reporting, let me try to answer your question this way, whenever there is reporting about any of those protectees, we share the information in a variety of ways, working with the intelligence community, working with whoever is the protective service with responsibility for that individual, and we do it in a timely way using the duty to warn process that was just referred to. And to my knowledge, everything along those lines that's relevant was shared in a timely way with the relevant people.
Thank you. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Director Ray, thanks for being here. Where were you when you heard that President Trump was shot, and then what were like your immediate actions, response to that as director?
I was about to have dinner with family, and I was horrified and angry.
I'm just thinking, the reason I asked the question is because I'm still trying to figure out kind of the lanes, what the FBI would respond to and what the Secret Service has the responsibility to respond to. Can you just kind of cover that again?
Sure. So the FBI is not responsible for, has never really been part of our mandate or mission for the physical security of venues, of specific protectees or anything like that. That's, if it's somebody within Secret Service's scope, that's their mandate and mission. We are a law enforcement and intelligence agency, and so if you think about it this way, we're the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're not the Federal Bureau of Security. You might say, well, what's the difference? Well, there is a difference. We investigate crimes, we investigate threats to national security, but we don't, questions about security posture, the adequacy of resources and assets that were deployed to protect a specific individual, whether there's enough security, and certainly the staffing of that security is not something the FBI, again, we're 116 years old, has historically done.
So at this point, have you been able to go through the shooter's home and kind of document kind of what you found as far as evidence goes?
So we have been able to search the shooter's home. So again, just sort of tying your first question to your second question now, our role is to conduct an investigation of the shooter and the attack. And so we're going to conduct a painstaking, intense investigation of that. We have, among other scenes that we've processed using evidence response teams, in addition to the rally scene itself, of course, we have been through the shooter's home, his bedroom, other parts of the house, et cetera.
Have you been able to establish that he did go to a range and either zero that weapon in or, at least target shoot that weapon prior to the assassination attempt?
So we do assess that he went to a shooting range the day before, not the only time he went to a shooting range. He was a fairly, avid might be a little strong, but a fairly avid, shooting hobbyist. And so he went to, belonged to different sort of clubs and went to certain ranges and that kind of thing. We do believe, based on what we've seen so far, that he went to a shooting range the day before and that he shot an AR-style rifle at that range the day before. I'm not sure we know for sure that it's the weapon that he used, but I think we assess that it probably is.
Have you been able to interview his parents?
Yes, we have.
And was there anything that was gained from that interview that would lead you to believe that they certainly were aware of what was going on?
I guess I want to be careful about talking about specific people's interviews, but I would say that his parents were cooperative with us. And as I've said before, and hopefully this gets at your question, we have not identified any accomplices, co-conspirators, or anything along those lines.
So it's the FBI's position right now that he still acted independently.
Again, we're still, I know it seems
Right.
like a lifetime since
Right.
July 13th, but we're still early stages. But we have not seen anything so far that would suggest to us that he acted with others.
How does the FBI view not just a Trump rally, but political rallies versus other types of events, you know, from a security perspective, compared to a college football game or any mass, you know, large crowd type gathering? Because I think one of the things that's most difficult to really to swallow at this point is that the idea that these Trump rallies have been happening for years, and that there could be such a lax approach to the physical security of those fairgrounds that day. And I'm wondering, you know, where does this fall? And then on top of that, that there were other presidential candidates out there that didn't have full Secret Service protection. RFK Jr. has been the most vocal about it. I was wondering if you could comment on the facilities as well as providing security for presidential candidates.
Well, again, I want to be a little bit careful to stay in my lane because, again, security posture and the adequacy of the security posture is really the core expertise and responsibility of agencies like the Secret Service. But certainly it is, I think, fair to say that outdoor events, whether they're political rallies or, as you say, you know, a college football game in an open stadium, a concert, these are places that are often, you know, particularly challenging to secure adequately because the range of threats that can face them are higher. In addition to that, as has been discussed a little bit here already in today's hearing, just threats to public officials, including politicians, is an increasingly pervasive part of today's landscape, and so that adds to the challenge. So you're talking about the combination of individuals who are increasingly targeted for violence, combined with venues that are softer and harder to secure targets, I guess is the way I would answer. But again, those kinds of questions, the adequacy of the security posture, all the resources that were or were not devoted, all that stuff, is my understanding would be very much in scope for the DHS Inspector General investigation and this outside independent panel that's been appointed.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Director, I think we're going to be able to get two more members' times of question, then we have to get to the floor for the Prime Minister. Gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, and thank you so much, Director Ray, for your transparency and your testimony today. First, I want to say my friend, my mentor, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, was known by many as the voice of reason here in Congress, and she was my friend before I even came to Congress. And in my freshman year, she kind of took me under her wing and she kind of showed me the ropes. And she was a force to be reckoned with. And I can say that she will never, ever be replaced. And she was a trailblazer, and I know that she will sorely be missed here in Congress. Director Ray, I only have one question for you today, but before we get to that point, I'd just like to reiterate today that political violence is never acceptable. Regardless of how different our political values and views are, attempted assassinations are a stain to the very democratic ideals of this nation. We have endured riots on Capitol Hill on January 6th, where a literal noose was erected on Capitol grounds, intended for then Vice President Pence and Speaker Emeritus Nancy Pelosi. Political violence against election workers, that has been expressed today. An attack on Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband. Threats against the FBI agents, as you have expressed, and prosecutors, and threats to the staff who serve the public every single day. Congressman Connolly's staff was targeted and attacked last year. And now we have the attempted assassination of a former president of the United States. All of this within just the last 3 years. This violence simply needs to end. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump was, by the grace of God, a failure. The weapon the 20-year-old man was able to obtain, an AR-15, generally has a shooting range up to 600 yards and shot Mr. Trump from almost 150 yards away. This weapon has the ability to kill multiple people in seconds. And sadly, Corey Compouture lost his life because of this man and because of this gun. Mr. Compouture's family will never be the same. Trust me, I understand that more than anyone else in this room. Is the near loss of a former president enough for this Congress to finally take action? Because there are 206 of us that are already standing in the wings, ready to take immediate action to ban assault weapons today. We need only 12 more of our colleagues to join us in courage and move the legislation to save lives of so many of the people that we are elected to serve by removing assault weapons from the hands of people who simply should not have them in their possession. We are crippling our democracy, and we are ripping apart our fellow Americans until we do. I ask today, because it is clearly it wasn't enough to take action when the lethality of assault weapons, we lost 26 and 7-year-olds and 6 teachers in 2012, when I also lost my son to gun violence, or 14 teenagers and 3 more teachers in 2018, nor was it enough when we lost 19 more children and 2 more teachers in 2022. Well, is it enough now? Now that a former president, the very president that many of you in this room are hoping will be reelected, almost lost his life because this Congress has failed to reinstate an assault weapons ban. A ban that, by the way, Republicans joined with Democrats to pass 30 years ago. Well, fine. If y'all don't like assault weapons ban, we can bring another bill that I have introduced to a vote, the Go Safe Act. This bill focuses on the components of the semi-automatic firearms and regulates their infrastructure, sale, and transfer. This, again, is not the time for thoughts and prayers. This is a time for action. Director Wray, just one question I have for you. Would you rather have your officers protected or protect someone against an assault weapon being shot from 147 yards away, or a standard pistol with no accessories attached?
Well, again, I'm going to refrain from appearing to comment on specific legislative proposals, but I can tell you that we are certainly concerned about the danger to law enforcement from any kind of high-powered weapon in the wrong hands. And it hits close to home for us because just not that long ago, 2 great agents, Laura Schwarzenberger and Dan Alphen, down in Miami, executing a search in a crimes against children case, were shot and killed by a subject with an automatic weapon. So again, dangerous weapons in the wrong hands is something that, of course, from a law enforcement perspective concerns us, but I'm not going to wade into the legislative process.
Well, thank you for that answer. I'd rather give our agents a fighting chance, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Wray, for being here today. So we spend $3 billion a year, excuse me, on the Secret Service, $3 billion. And it would seem that we could and should have had a better job done a few weeks ago on the 13th than what we saw. Will you have anything to say about correcting what are the obvious deficiencies in what the Secret Service did?
Well, For the most part, the deficiencies or adequacy or inadequacy of Secret Service's performance, decision-making, resources, all that stuff is in the purview of those two other investigations, that is the DHS Inspector General and the outside independent panel that's been announced. Having said that, our investigation, which, as I've testified now, involves several hundred FBI employees and every asset we can bring to bear, of the shooter, again, our investigations of the shooter and his attack, of course, involves interviewing law enforcement, including lots and lots and lots of Secret Service people. And so we'll share all that with those reviews so that they can answer those questions.
The reason I'm asking this is because this isn't the first time the Secret Service has been before Congress. There was a 435-page report issued in 2015 by Congress saying, fix yourself. They didn't. In fact, there was a follow-up in 2019 where they had only done a few of the, I think it was 18 or 19 different specific things they were supposed to do. They'd done some, but certainly not all. There was another follow-up in 2022, and again, the Secret Service had not done what Congress had asked. I guess my question to you, Mr. Director, is what should Congress do? A 435-page report 9 years ago, and still the Secret Service didn't do what it was told to do then. Can you help, Director Wray? Because this type of performance is not acceptable.
Well, I think even former Director Cheadle has acknowledged that this was a significant operational failure. If there are ways for the FBI to be helpful beyond what we're already doing in terms of our investigation, we stand ready to try to be helpful. I do want to say, as somebody who's been in law enforcement for most of my career, I've worked with some just phenomenal Secret Service agents. Going all the way back to my time as a line prosecutor, and they have an incredibly hard job, and I have a lot of affection and respect for the men and women of the Secret Service.
I'm sure you do, and I'm sure you're right. But the trouble is, when Congress says you need to do these 19 things and they don't, something needs to change. Now, the director has resigned, but you're going to be in a position, because your agency is doing such a careful review, to say a lot about what should have been done. I guess the real issue is much more of what the higher-ups in that agency are or are not doing. Perhaps that's on us.
And we will share with those reviews anything that we come across that could be helpful or relevant to them for those questions.
Yeah, let me quickly go to some details on the actual events. It appeared to a lot of us, as the Secret Service was taking former President Trump from the stage, that he was clearly still in view of everybody. And had there been another shooter, I didn't see him being protected. Are you going to raise that issue?
I think that's really more in scope of these two other reviews. Both of them.
Okay, that's fine. Let me go to the shooter as he was on top of the roof. Apparently another officer from another police division saw him and quickly ducked down because the shooter aimed a gun at him. And then the shooter apparently, was he prone at the time he took the shot toward the president?
So my understanding is that the local officer that we're talking about, with the assistance of another local officer, was able to kind of get up and see onto the roof where he observed the shooter, I believe, in a prone shooting position. The shooter then turned and faced him, the local officer, with the weapon.
From the prone position.
That's my understanding.
And then he went back to the prone position.
And this is all seconds before the shooter took his
But that entire time, the shooter was in the scope sight of the counter sniper, correct?
That one I'd have to double check on. I know we've interviewed the counter sniper, but I'm not sure I know the answer.
The counter sniper didn't take a shot until after the assassin attempted to shoot the former president and others. He got off 8 shots before the counter sniper shot the shooter. What's with that protocol? Can you get that fixed?
Well, I really want to be careful not to be, given the scope of our investigation, somehow second-guessing the very difficult act and decision it takes for a counter sniper to kill another human being in that situation. It's all happening in seconds. So
8 shots.
Yeah.
And that was after he'd been seen for 20 minutes. I yield back. Thank you.
Director, that's an important question, though, because you've talked to the counter sniper. And that, I mentioned this in our opening statement, that critical 5 minutes from 6:09 to 6:14, and what takes place there is critical, and I think that's what the gentleman was getting at, and we were hopeful that you could tell us something about your interview with the counter sniper.
Yeah, I guess I want to distinguish a couple things. There is some individual, not law enforcement, I believe, who spotted the shooter on the roof a few minutes before, but I think law enforcement spotting him with the weapon on the roof is seconds before the shot.
Okay,
So
that's important.
yeah, so I think there's two different things
I think
going
what you're
on
saying
there.
is it wasn't maybe that's, if the bad guy shoots at 6:11, then you're saying this encounter with local law enforcement that Mr. Bentz was just getting into happened just seconds before that and maybe not 2 minutes before that?
That's my understanding. That, in other words, that there's different things here. There's an individual, at least one individual I can think of, not law enforcement, member of the public, who observed him on the roof. Not clear whether or not the individual saw a weapon or not, but saw him in a way that was concerning. That is some number of, not many, but like just a handful of minutes. I think separate from that, as far as law enforcement goes, in terms of a weapon, this local officer that we just talked about observed the individual, again, literally just seconds before the shooter took his shots. Separate and apart from all of that, roughly, I think, maybe a little less than, or around an hour before the shooting, there were local law enforcement officers who observed the shooter, not up on the roof, not with a weapon, but with I believe, a rangefinder, kind of like you would use if you were playing golf or something, in a way that was odd and suspicious. So that started happening with local law enforcement beforehand. But in terms of shooter, meaning with the weapon, law enforcement, my understanding is that the first time that happened was this local officer climbing up on the roof seconds before the
Again,
shooting.
we want that timeline. I think the committee wants that timeline and communications that were taking place in that short period of time.
Again, as I've said with everything else, I really want to be careful. I'm leaning in, trying to share as much as I can here. Facts are evolving, things may change, but we are working on a timeline, among other things.
Committee will stand in recess until after the Prime Minister's remarks conclude.